Okay, welcome everyone to our class and studying a book called Of Hearts and Minds. And you can see it on the screen, and I think there's probably some copies around here. Can't see it on the screen or far away. And for any who have missed the last few sessions or missed all of them so far, we're right now studying on the prophet Samuel. We've covered Eli, or Eli, as the Hebrew would have it, and Hannah, which was the mother of Samuel, and now we're studying Samuel. And the book is about the characters of these. It's a character study, really, and turning out the features and the prominent things about them that were of their spoke of their character. So we've covered, I think we'll be able to finish up Samuel quite easily today. We've covered quite a bit of it already, and we've come down through his upbringing and how he had always, he'd been dedicated to God by his mother at a very early age, probably just after weaning, that she took him to the house of God, and talked about how he grew and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men. And so it speaks to us a lot about his character and his godliness, and reminds us of another of whom very similar words are spoken, with the Lord Jesus Christ, who also grew in favor both with God and with men. And it appears that Samuel was about 12 years old when he first heard the voice of God giving him the instructions, and it would seem that it was about in that time period, which was around about the 13th year, I think, was of Eli's judgeship. He judged Israel for 40 years, we read, and about the 13th year of that, into that judgeship, is where this message came to him from God through Samuel. And it would seem there that is also about the time that Samuel began to have a big input into the governance of the people himself. It says all Israel from Dan even to Beersheba, in other words, from the very north to the very south of the nation, knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. We read that in the 3rd chapter, just after that message came to him. So we don't know for sure, but the assumption is from that Samuel, that is where he began judging. And it was about 27, he was about 30 years of age when the Ark of God was captured by the Philistines, and Shiloh, which was Shiloh at that time, we had a bit of a video of this, but Shiloh at that time was the capital of Israel as it existed at that time. That's where the tabernacle was, and that's where everybody came, again, from north to south to worship and to offer sacrifice. That was the place, which the temple in Jerusalem later took the place of that. But at this point, that was the place where all Israel came to worship and to offer sacrifice. So Samuel was kind of right in the middle of all that, and in a really good place to get to know everybody, because the whole nation at some point would cross paths with him. And so you'd be able to get to know everybody, and that's how he grew. And just by his character that we had, that speaks volumes about his character, how that the people just gravitated to him. And then, of course, we read where the Ark of God was captured by the Philistines, and Shiloh was destroyed. And from there, it seemed like the capital dissipated. And the only other place in the nation that kind of spoke as a gathering place for the people after that was Ramah, which was Samuel's home. And he established an altar there, and it seems like that's where the nation gathered from that point on to the time of David, who captured Jerusalem and established it there. So anyway, that's just kind of a little bit of the history of it. We've got down to the. Let me just speak a little bit of the part about where he established, you might say, universities, schools, Bible schools. We took that last week too, and see if I can just bring up a map of that. Here, shared screen. Yeah. So, enlarge this a bit. So Samuel traveled and he made a circuit. Talk about him making a circuit, and he made a circuit year by year, Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and then we'd come back to Ramah. So this kind of described his circle. And a lot of these places were also described as being the places of schools. We call them, Bible schools. They had the Torah at that time, the Torah schools. And there was something very, very important that needed to be done at that time. And Bible here. Yeah, so here's the schools that they're small. So Ramah, Bethel, Gilgal, Jericho, and we read of one at Carmel, and then in Samaria. Question marks on those, I'm not sure. Jerusalem, it was spoken of later on as a college in Jerusalem. It's spoken of in 2 Kings 22, verse 14. So it says there that Hilkiah the priest and Ahikam and Akbor and so on, they went to Huldah the prophetess. This is in the time of Josiah the king, when he was trying to kind of reset the kingdom, and they found the book of the law hidden in the wall. So they went to Huldah the prophetess, and she's described there as dwelling in Jerusalem in the college. And that word for college is the word Mishnah. It occurs in Deuteronomy 17, that says, whenever a king comes to establish the throne, that he shall write him a Mishnah of this law, or a copy, which is what the word Mishnah means. It means copying out the law. So that gives us, I think, a hint of what was going on at these schools. They were being brought up and educated about the Torah, but we have to remember that at this time was a major time in the transcription of the law. From our Sunday school here. So, anyway, about this time, I won't bother going aside too much here on this, but about this time, here we are, right? You can see on this little graph right here, that right in the center here, which is about the year 1200 BC, is in the middle of that. Bigger. So this is where the books of the Proverbs, the prophets, and everything was being written around that 1200 to 1000. The first 5 books of Moses, which would be what was in extant when these schools are going on, that would be what would be being copied, because, if you have a book around even today for 50 years, there's some disintegration there, right? Think about what happens in 100 years or in 200 years. And these scrolls were on much inferior paper than what we have today. So they'd have to be copied regularly in order to keep that up. in order to keep a continuance there to the ultimate manuscripts that we've come across, from the Qumran caves and the manuscripts upon which our King James Version is based. That would all have been copied and copied and copied and copied down through time. It would have to be done at least once every 50 years. So they had to have schools, they had to have people educated in linguistics. They'd have to know the language, they'd have to know, and the copying was meticulous. They couldn't make a deviation, like a tick mark on a letter would make a whole difference in the meaning of the word. So they had to be well educated in what they're doing so that we know, and this was all in God's plan. And He would see this carried down through the ages. So these schools were important, and we read of this continuance of the schools from the time of the Judges and the time of Samuel, right down to the time of Ezra. And it seems like that's where that black mark on there stops at about the time of Ezra. That was the end of the schools, you might say, when the exile happened. Israel was carried off to Babylon. And of course, from there we have the Babylonian manuscripts that were a big part of our Bible. So they continued even in Babylon. And they continued in Egypt and Alexandria later. But in Israel, this is where it was in the time of Samuel. So I think that's an important part, that it was Samuel that really set that up and got that movement rolling. And Jenny, just raise your hand. Any questions or comments on that? Mr. Gordon.
Wasn't that in the time of Elijah?
Yeah.
The prophets said that time.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and that's where, we have Jericho. They were the sons of the prophets where Jericho came to Elisha. And that's wherever it says the sons of the prophets, it means not that they were the physiological sons, but they were the generational sons. They were the, I say the continuing of that they were the teachers, continuance of the teachers, sons of the prophets. Yes, way like. So that kind of brings us up to where we're at. Study. You have to bear with me a little bit. I just changed here from Windows 10 to Windows 11, so I've got a little bit of lag time here sometimes. I'm used to it. I just did that last night. Not a good time. So anyway, we went through how that, this was last week, we studied about how that the people came to Samuel and said, we want a king over us. We don't want, we want to be like all the other nations around us and have a king. And that was a major incident that happened in the life of Samuel. And the writer of this book went through, giving us an idea of what that would have meant for Samuel. It was a rejection of everything that he was doing, and his wisdom, his judicial skill, as the writer says here, his carefulness, his compassion. It was all rejected. He always done his best. Admittedly, had not been able to achieve his very best, but he had done his best, and he was rejected. Now he suffered the mortification of that rejection. And, it was, he'd gone through the process when Eli was rejected. That was a process where, God prophesied that Eli would, that priesthood would fail, and it would be superseded by a different line later on, which happened at the time of David. So now Samuel's getting an idea of what Eli would have felt in that rejection. But God comes to him and tells him that it's not you they are rejecting, it's me. And the writer here goes how that must have calmed the spirit of Samuel greatly, because it is not just a matter of wounded pride, it was not just a matter of disappointed workmanship or personal advancement that was arrested, was that they had rejected God as their king. And so Samuel could maybe take a little, I don't just, but the comfort, I guess, would be the word in that it wasn't just him. He was, and the writer brings out how it was almost like he was sharing that rejection with God, or God was sharing it with him. We're in this together. They've rejected both of us. But the thing about it is that, and I think we ended up with this observation as to his character, is that he remained functional in crisis. This was probably the greatest crisis of his career as a judge, but through it all he remained functional. He didn't go in as another brings out how another prophet had done, and that was Jonah, in the case of Nineveh, where he built himself a booth and kind of sulked about it. Samuel was none of that. He proceeded on. He went and picked up the king and made him a king, and then went on with his life. And that's where we resume today. I think we should be able to finish this up because we've only got a couple of short sections. So, with the king is the title of this paragraph. It says, another thing which reveals the character of Samuel is how he treated his successor. The man before him was a rival, but more, he was a successor. So the one who was at one time his inferior, Saul, was now the king. Remember what we said previously about such a situation, how hard it is for people to assist the preferment of those who once they commanded. How easy it is to hinder the advancement of those who are overtaking what once was yours. Samuel was not like this. He was generous. We said he had the abundance mentality. There's enough here for both of us. With grace, he assists all to rise and progress and recommends him, notice that, recommends him to the people. Here is something interesting. Once before, Samuel had to assist in the deposition of one in authority, Eli. He did it, but reluctantly, because it had to be done. Now he has to do it again, to himself, and he does it with liberal fullness and without hesitation. He elevates Saul above himself. The people and Samuel make Saul the king. One thing we must now stress. Although Samuel was courteous and generous to King Saul, he was also straight. When the time came for rebuke, he made it plain. He was not a man for vague generalities. Samuel said to Saul, "What hast thou done?" and went on to tell him, "Thou hast done foolishly. Thy kingdom shall not continue." Some voices might have urged restraint. Perhaps he could say it in a way which will be less pointed. After all, we must try to see the best in everybody. And I think we've remarked before that in any other situation, our kingdom, any other, take something like that happened in the world today, in pretty much any nation, he'd be up for treason. He's rebelling against the one in authority. So anyway, after all, we must try to see the best in everybody. For love's sake, could you not leave it? How often have I heard that? And how often is it love misapplied? Samuel was a realist. He told it as it was, and he had to, because he was the voice of God. The prophets, we commented on this last time, how that the prophet meant the mouth of God. He was there as God manifestation. He was in place of God, as it were, in the sense that he was the mouth of God, speaking for God, what God told him to say. Samuel 15, 1 Samuel 15, and the matter of Amalek, reveals the same straight, uncompromising dedication to speaking the truth plainly. You know the details well. I think it's good here just to go to that chapter in 1 Samuel, chapter 15. And just take a look there at verses 1 and 2. So Samuel also said unto Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Reminding him of his station, his great position he had, Saul had. And he says, now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. And that word hearken there is so important. It's probably one of the most important things he said to him in this instruction he gave him, because that word is from the Hebrew shema, and it means to hear intelligently. It's more than just hearing. It's the same word that's used over and over and over again in the King James Version and translated obey. Same word, hearken, obey. And this was Saul's downfall in this whole episode. And he goes on there to say that, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. He's talking there about the people when they came up from Egypt. And we remember there what that was all about. So Egypt, this is Exodus 17, verses 8 to 16. It says, then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, choose us out men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. And we know what happened, that as long as Moses' hands were up, the people of Israel prospered, and when Moses tired and his hand came down, the Amalek prevailed, and Moses' hands were heavy. So they took a stone, and Moses sat on it, and Aaron and Hur held up his hands, and they discomfited, they defeated Amalek and his people at the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and read it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. That's the important verse here, because this is what the commission now that Samuel is giving to Saul to perform, a really important commission. This is fulfilling what is prophesied, or what God committed to do way back in the time of the Exodus. It'd be about, 350 years before this. So now he's telling Saul to go back there and smite Amalek. Basically, go back down pretty much to the Sinai Peninsula and wipe them out. And that is something I think we sometimes do. We underestimate the gravity of this mission. This is probably the most important mission that Saul had been given in his career as king, was to go down, and this was no small campaign. But Saul gathered the people together, he numbered them. There were 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. and they started their march down there, and that would be a distance of about around 100 miles. And, you know, that would take them a long time. Think of the leadership that would be required to lead a company of men that size through that terrain down there. And what happens, and this is really what God is instructing you to do, is pretty much nothing less than a genocide. Wipe them out. Man, woman, child, all the animals, everything. Wipe them out completely. It was a genocide. There's no doubt about it. It was a divinely instructed genocide. Why would God commit to do something like that is the question for the Lord.
I was going to ask the same question. It doesn't fit with his perceived
It wouldn't go down well, would it?
No.
So,
ideas, I think one of them is that it shows that God has a purpose with nations, and that those that don't fit in that purpose really are expendable, because they will not fit themselves to this purpose. I don't know if that's oversimplifying.
yeah, we know of instances where God had changed his mind about things like that, such as with the Assyrians in Nineveh at the time of Jonah. You know, the whole city repented, the king, the city, everything repented, and God changed his mind in terms of that particular generation. It didn't happen at that time. And so that tells us something here about Amalek, about Agag, and the Amalekites of this time. Basically, they had to change. There was no difference between this, even though it maybe was 300 years removed or more. They were the same people, the same king, the same outlook, the same character as what had gone up against the people of Israel as they were on their journey from Egypt to Sinai. Same one, you know, in terms of character, in terms of their relationship to God. Brother Austin?
I was just going to say the other thing it kind of shows is there's really only one metric God judges good and evil by, and that's whether or not it conforms to the will of God. And you know, we kind of nowadays we can get a pretty ambiguous view of what good and evil is. Often comes down to whether or not it feels good or bad, and you know, that instead of coming down to the judgment of God, what is right and wrong, comes down to what we feel is right or wrong according to our consciences at the time. So yeah, it's an important thing to remember that really there's only one measurement, and God is the one that decides what that measurement actually is.
Right, yeah, it's good. It's a good point, and you know, and the question always comes up: well, is God fair? You know, would this be fair to go in here and just wipe out a whole nation? But again, it has to come down to that point as to who were they? You know, were they, and what was their state of mind towards their relationship with God? And God would not, in fairness to God, he would not wipe out the people that were totally repentant and willing to come to him in total humiliation and say, you know, we believe you, we trust you, we're going to put ourselves in your hands. That was not the case here. So we'll proceed then with just with that little observation. And I'm also going to just going to bring up a map of this campaign where he had to go here. So just going to enlarge that a bit. So started out up here at Gilgal, Gibeah, where Saul had, I was kind of Saul's headquarters. So the solid line, the solid blue line, is kind of where they marched down southward. You know, it went through Hebron, Carmel, That's the Carmel, which was the Nabal's, Abigail and Nabal. That was the story we read of Abigail and Nabal. Not the Elisha's or Elijah's Carmel, Mount Carmel, but this is a Carmel that was south of Hebron. And then you go to Arad, and here is where we come into the territory, the green area. That was the territory of Amalek in here. So when he gets down here, he talks to the Kenites and says, you better move yourselves out of the way. He gets down to this village, and they did. And then he proceeded down here to Amalek, and right down to Kadesh Barnea. So basically, they retract their journey back down to, and covering in, I don't know how many days, but a journey that took Israel 38 years to go from Kadesh Barnea. They had to sojourn in the wilderness because of their disobedience, of course. That was an part of that. But it still took them 38 years to go from Kadesh Barnea to where, Gilgal and Gibeah was. And now he's retracing these steps to as it were, set things right in the circumstance where Amalek had resisted God's purpose in bringing Israel out of Egypt. That was kind of the last phase of setting things right, as far as God is concerned in that journey. You agree?
Well, just bringing it up to our day, we've got Israel in conflict with Gaza and Iran. Does that bring some meaning to present day conflict?
Patterns, there's patterns there for sure.
They're sworn enemies of Israel. God's made it quite clear that it's through Israel that salvation will come. Therefore, they're in opposition to that. And their idea was to eliminate Israel. So that would be given aside as well from a human point of view. So which side is better?
That's it.
Yeah, I think we go into the New Testament, we see that God's plan of salvation is concerning the seed of Abraham. And Paul describes the seed of Abraham as the faithful. And we have all down through history the nation of Israel assuming that they are in God's plan because they are the seed of Abraham, and indeed they are important. But that is the point of conflict, because most of the people in the Middle East who are enemies of Israel today are actually also descendants of Abraham through Ishmael, and the other line, of course, is through Esau. And so they are cousins, and they lay claim to that land on account of counting themselves the seed of Abraham. The lesson that has to be learned for all nations of the earth and all religious systems of the earth is who is really the seed of Abraham. The real seed of Abraham is the faithful, and the physical seed of Abraham, Israel, has to become part of the spiritual seed of Abraham in the end, and they will have opportunity to do so when Christ returns. But that sort of is the context of the whole thing, and it takes my mind back to verse 1 there, where it talks about that word hearken. Pay attention. You have here a man who is told, I'm anointing you to be king over Israel. You're going to be the top man in the country and the nation, but don't forget to pay attention to what God is telling you. It doesn't give you free hand over the people. Pay attention to what God wants you to pay attention to, because your leadership of Israel is dependent on your attention to God's voice. And as it turned out later, he failed to pay attention and his leadership was terminated.
Thanks for the some comments. Brother Gordon? I said, thank you for your comment. Anyway, saying you know the details well. Samuel 15, the matter of Amalek reveals the same straight, uncompromising dedication to speaking the truth plainly. You know the details well. What Saul refused to do, Samuel did. He executed Agag. Agag was the king of Amalek. And just a quick passage or a quick comment in regards to Agag. Agag is not really the proper name. It was a title, like we have the name, the term Gog. They both kind of mean the same thing. They're the king, one at the top. There's no linguistic connection between Agag and Gog in the Hebrew, but except for the meaning. They both mean the same. They're a title with one at the top. And so Agag it's the same thing. What his personal name was, we don't know. But there was prophecies, goes back to the time of Balaam, talked about Israel's king shall be higher than Agag. He's higher than the high one of Amalek, Moab, and also we read that Haman was an Agagite. Again, not meaning that he was necessarily a descendant of this particular king, but he was a descendant of a royal line. He was a descendant of a king. So whatever it could have been Amalek, I think it probably was, but it wasn't necessarily this particular person. Just so we have that straight. So anyway, this is what you make of it, I know not, but it does show us the reverence with which Samuel held the command of God. To obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken is better than the fat of rams. Samuel knew it. Saul did not. It is a mark of the compassionate spirit of Samuel to read, Samuel grieved over Saul. To a man of God, to see other men of God fail is always a grief, and so it was to Samuel. No gloating over the failure of the king, but instead sadness and sorrow and compassion. Did this great man have no faults then? No doubt he did. But there is nothing in the record to tell us, save one perhaps, and it is very human. His sons disgraced him. Like Eli's sons, they were a hindrance to the purpose of God with his people, though not in the same degree. The record does not reveal where the blame lies for this situation, but some responsibility must rest upon Samuel. He was not responsible for their misdeeds, but he was responsible for allowing them to continue in office, in case of family ties taking precedence over a prophet's wisdom. He was a father who loved his boys too well. Which of us cannot sympathize? And all of us can understand. But I think out of all of this is as we go through and kind of look at the overall character of Samuel and how he responded, how he held the will of God in such esteem, to take up a sword and hew Agag into pieces. You would think of Samuel as not being that kind of a person, but his relationship with God transformed him into that kind of a person. He did what had to be done. But through it all, and the way he treated Saul, we see again just that abundance mentality that he had. That this is not about me. It's not about me. There's room if that's all it was. There's room enough here for both of us. All I want to do is to see God's will carried out. That's it.
Yeah, he's given us quite a view of the relationship between Samuel and Saul. And when we think about Saul's actions and attitudes towards David later on, we get a picture of the kind of character that Saul was becoming. And the question comes to mind, why was it that Saul didn't have Samuel put to death for speaking straight to him? What was it about their relationship that made a difference there? Most kings, given the kind of messages that Samuel had to take to Saul, would have cut off his head.
Gordon?
I would say, from what I've gathered, Saul was a good person. And that would require character. He depended on Samuel. He saw him as an ally, but he was too.
Yeah, and I think that also Samuel, the esteem in which the people held Samuel, I think it would have caused an insurrection if he had attempted to put Samuel down. Samuel was feared by the people, and that was something that caused hesitation on the part of Saul. And it was the reason that the Pharisees held back on Jesus for so long, who feared the people. My brother Austin.
I'm just gonna say, this kind of goes back to a comment that I made on Wednesday night on the Pharisees, where, you know, at the times where they should have not taken action, they take action inappropriately. And at the points where they should have taken action, they do nothing. And we kind of see the same thing with Saul. You know, where, like, when he was anointed king, when he should have been standing up in front of the people, he was hiding from the people. And then, you know, when he should have been waiting for Samuel to come and offer sacrifice, he decided to sacrifice himself. Or, like, give the sacrifice for himself and for the people. And then you see again here, you know, when he should have been taking action and making sure he carries out the will of God, he decides to, oh, I'm just going to say, again, you can see like this whole system of a misjudgment of when something should be done, Saul is not around. And then when something should be waited for or given the correct amount of time, Saul decides to jump on it and do it himself. And you can just see that like misapplication and misjudgment all the time. And Samuel is always there, kind of like Samuel shows up a little bit later and is like, oh, no, you did it all wrong. Here's the thing you should have been doing, and now let me do it for you because he couldn't handle it himself. Like here when he shows up after the battle and he's like, you didn't do what you're supposed to, here am I to kind of fill in the gap. Or when Saul, you know, sacrifices and doesn't wait for Samuel, and then Samuel shows up and he's like, no, you shouldn't have not sacrificed. So it kind of just comes down to like simple decisions to do something or not do something and doing them wrong.
Thanks, Brother Austin. And Brother Sid?
Well, I was just thinking, like in terms of the popular resistance to Saul doing anything to Samuel. It is true, no doubt played a part, but it did not later deter Saul from wanting to destroy David, even though the people had a great respect for David. In fact, it drove him to want to kill David. So I think there's something buried in this one paragraph there. It says, it ends, Samuel grieved over Saul. And there was no gloating over the failure of the king, but instead sadness and sorrow and compassion. And I think Samuel must have managed in some way to convey his care and compassion towards Saul, even though he had straight things to tell him. And I think that was an important aspect of his relationship with Saul, because Saul could have easily been aroused to violence. He was a proud and self-centered man, and that had to be handled carefully, and Samuel knew how to do it.
I think the other thing is Saul probably saw Samuel as a mentor kind of figure, where David was instead his rival and successor coming up through the line. And you can kind of see, like, when Eli passes over the reins to Samuel, like when it went through Eli, there's like a peaceful passing over and understanding by Eli that, like, now is the time when my kind of judgment over Israel comes to an end and Samuel is on the rise. And then we see it with Samuel in the case of Saul, and Saul does the opposite. Saul is like, ain't no way I'm giving this up to the next guy. Right? And you can see how much strife and division that causes.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting when we get into Saul in the next chapter here, you know, talking about Saul and his character. Because it's just the opposite, really. Samuel had the abundance mentality, Saul had the scarcity mentality. There's not enough here for David, you and me both, you know. Saul could so easily have given David assignments and positions of under his kingdom and under his authority, but working with him, they didn't. You know, he saw him as a rival, and there's not enough room here for you and me both. And you know, that's so exemplary of the scarcity mentality.
No, I was just gonna say, I think further Austin's comment is, you know, really kind of hit the center of it. Like Saul was, when he was giving Samuel's younger stage of his life, and then it came to David, he was older, and it was envy, it was jealousy, and those things come across very strongly with Christ.
And that's also part of the scarcity mentality syndrome. Yeah. You know, and then you get down to where Saul has his interaction with Samuel, or vice versa. You know, that Saul is saying, "I've obeyed God. I've destroyed the Amalekites. I've brought back the king here, and we're going to dedicate this victory to God. I've brought back all the sheep and oxen for sacrifice." You know, and Samuel says, "Has God great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying?" That same word, Shema, the same word he talked about in that first verse about hearkening, because that was the instruction. And Saul didn't hearken, and he didn't obey. And that's the point. And you know, so we have to say here, well, was there anything wrong with sacrifice? Sacrifice was certainly that was an ordinance that God had commanded that they should do to worship Him, to sacrifice animals to Him, and but what we see here happening is that the principle of obeying is being violated by the adherence to a precept. You know, the precept has to go along with the principle. Otherwise, it's no point. And that was what Christ's contention was with the Pharisees. So, to book here and talk about the next part here, all change. I come to my last argument about the character of Samuel. In 1 Samuel 9, there's an account of Saul coming to the city and trying to find the seer's house, Samuel's house, to get help with the finding of his lost asses. He met some maidens and he asked them, and in their reply they revealed that the judge had come. There was to be a sacrifice. The people would not eat until he came. He was to pronounce a blessing, and after that there was to be a great festival. Every detail was known and recounted. Now, think of the state of things before Samuel became a judge. Had there been an inquiry in the city, then there would have been no sacrifice. No one would have had any knowledge or association with a religious service. For it says then that men abhorred the offering of the Lord, 1 Samuel 2, verse 17. So sacrifice was an important thing. But now the first chance passerby knew all about it and was waiting with excitement for it. Samuel died, but his influence remained. He was not forgotten. The system of justice at Bethel and Mizpah would be the foundation of better things to come. Let the final voice be the voice of the people he judged. Once he said this to them, that was in that 12th chapter that we read at the start. Behold, here I am. Witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose ass have I taken? For whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or of whose hand have I received any bribe to blind mine eyes therewith? And I will restore it to you. As we mentioned, in those days, before Samuel, even during the time of Samuel, bribes were a part of how they did business. It was very common, but Samuel says, who have I bribed? And they said, thou hast not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither hast thou taken aught of any man's hand. And he said unto them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that ye have not found aught in my hand. And they answered, he is witness. When this happened, Samuel was old and gray-headed, and at last the sentence of humanity fell upon him, and he fell asleep. Let the words of his people be his epitaph, and for us we will say simply, he was a good man and a patriot, just what his mother would have wished. That brings us to the end, and it appears that Samuel was probably, like it says here, he was old and gray-headed. As far as we can ascertain, he was probably about 53 years old when he passed away. He wouldn't be found to be too old in our day, but he had a big life. We have to remember he's about 27 years old when the Ark of God was taken. The Ark of God remained with the Philistines and then was taken back to Israel. It remained about 21 years before David finally brought it back to Jerusalem, and that was after both Samuel and Saul had passed. 27 plus 20 gives us 47, and we had a few years for that. I think about 53 years old. And that was in Chronic and Hebraic, and that's what Brother Thomas puts in that too.
What was their lifespan normally?
Well, it talks about 4 years and 7, or 10, pardon me. And if you exceed that, you're bonus territory.
That's going to be our first 50.
I look at it as a bonus. So anyway, that brings us to the end of that section, and the next one we'll be looking at is Saul, Cush. I don't know who
Regan is on next.
I think Brother Regan was listening.
I didn't see one.
Oh, I sent him a text.
Oh, they may have head up to.
Could be.
Long weekend.
Yeah, yeah.